a lot of women are saying men aren't lonely enough. And I agree. And I'm going to talk about why, because I have my own take on it. I'm sure other people have come to this conclusion too, but I'm just saying this is what I see as why men aren't lonely enough. First of all, I'm going to say when I say men aren't lonely enough, it's not about punishing men. Okay? Like you guys, I'm sure have seen the T-shirts and the slogans that say "Be glad we only want equality, not payback." That's where I'm at. But the reason why men aren't lonely enough is because men have benefited from a system for centuries, millennia, that puts them at the top, that gives them privilege and advantage in almost every situation. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying every man is the most privileged individual in every situation. I mean, there are a lot of intersecting things like capitalism, class warfare, racial issues, and so forth. But as a general rule, the patriarchy has given the most privilege to men for the longest amount of time. Within this system, of course, there are men who are oppressed and robbed of opportunity and so forth. I'm not saying that men always end up on the top of every situation. That's a misunderstanding of what privilege is. Privilege means that in the same situation, you have a better chance than this other person of this other group. Not that you always end up on top of each shuffle, okay? We can't all be like some billionaire or something that men worship as some alpha male, okay? But given all of these advantages, they have still made a mess of the world. And then when social progress occurs and women start getting just a taste of equality, and also this applies to people of color and other groups that have been oppressed, but we're talking specifically about the patriarchy here. When women get just a taste of freedom and equality, not full freedom or equality, but just a little bit, like we've been getting over the last few decades, men suddenly can't compete on an even playing ground. And we see that time and time again. That's why education and jobs and all of these things are flipping to women. Because given even a little bit of a more even playing ground, women are succeeding more. Now, why is that? The reason why is because when you are raised with privilege and advantage, you are less likely to develop the skills necessary to succeed. People who are raised, and you see this with people of color in the United States as well, outperforming white people, people who are raised with disadvantage, when they are allowed to overcome that disadvantage and given us at least a somewhat, slightly more even playing ground, immediately start to outperform the people who have traditionally had advantage. Now, I'm not saying this to say that men are somehow less capable than women. What I'm saying is that the patriarchy and deep patriarchal conditioning damages their ability to compete and succeed on an even playing ground. And this is actually one of the ways in which the patriarchy deeply oppresses men as well as women. Because it actually robs men of the ability in so many fields, not just the job market, not just education, but in so many areas it robs men of the very capabilities that they would have had without the patriarchal conditioning that would have made them more likely to succeed. So the society tells them that they're going to succeed, while at the same time robbing them of the abilities that would make them most likely to succeed, which is why we have a lot of bitter, burnt out, angry men who have been oppressed by capitalism and the patriarchy and so forth, and are all blaming it on women. But that very reaction that they cannot stand a little bit of competition from people who are women or people of color or LGBTQ or whatever shows that on some level they recognize how unearned their supremacy is. Now, why does that lead me to say that they are not lonely enough? Because their male loneliness epidemic. Now, I'm not saying this describes every lonely man, okay? Some men have a legitimate right and reason to feel lonely, just like women, just like LGBTQIA plus folks. I'm not saying that. But this quote unquote male loneliness epidemic that is being blamed on feminism and women's empowerment has nothing really to do with women. It has to do with men's inability to exist outside of a hierarchical domination submission framework, and it has their inability to perform on an equal basis because of their patriarchal conditioning. And these two things intersect because the hierarchy dominance submission framework feeds into them being unable to accept an equal level of competition. They have to either dominate or submit. And since women are clearly inferior and can't be submitted to, they can't be allowed to compete because then they might win. You see how it all fits together? They're creating their own loneliness epidemic by their reaction to women's rights, feminism, and empowerment. It is a self-created epidemic and a self-created problem because they are refusing to adapt to the new reality. And instead, basically, what we've seen over the last few decades, culminating in the far right and MAGA, is a giant hissy fit tantrum that they can't be at the top of the heap and control everything and everyone anymore. We see this in race relations, we see this in political relations, we see this in gender relations, be it men versus women or the treatment of the LGBTQ community. It is the reaction to the loss of privilege and position and hierarchy. It is an attempt to revert society to something that they know, understand, and can control. And that's why men aren't lonely enough. Because when we concede to this male loneliness epidemic, and again, I'm not talking about every lonely male, so don't come at me. But when we concede to this supposed patriarchally, what am I trying to say here? This patriarchally constructed male loneliness epidemic, when we concede to it and go, oh, honey, how can I make you feel less lonely? We are enabling the patriarchy. We are carrying water for the patriarchy. The only way for men to get through this patriarchal loneliness epidemic is to get deeper in it, learn from it, God forbid they learn something, and then come out the other side wiser. And frankly, those who don't will eventually fall by the wayside because the times they are changing. Victor Hugo, and I might mess this up, but it said basically, no force on earth can stop an idea whose time has come. And the idea of patriarchy is an idea whose time has passed. And the idea of a more even, more equitable form of mankind is an idea whose time has come. Whether it be women, people of color, any oppressed group, the time has come that those people are rising and fighting for what is theirs. And I'm sorry that that's a painful episode for patriarchally conditioned men. There are a lot of men that I know that are embracing the change, that are embracing the new ideas, that are embracing a more even and equitable society. And for the ones who are not, I'm sorry, you are creating your own pain. And you are creating ultimately your own obsolescence. And that's why they get so angry when women say men aren't lonely enough. Because men aren't going to liberate themselves from the patriarchy by themselves. They don't recognize its oppression. Women do recognize its oppression, but a lot of women only recognize its oppression of women. We have to recognize its oppression of both men and women to truly understand and break the system. We have to break the wheel, so to speak, for my nerds friends. But that's why men aren't lonely enough.